The 70th session of the Senate in the second regular session of the 16th Congress is hereby called to order. Senator J.V. Ejercito will lead our chamber in prayer.
Lord Almighty, once again we thank you for gathering us today. We thank you for your continuous guidance and forgiveness. Despite all difficulties, we will praise and serve you with all our heart. We offer you, Lord, all the trials that our country is dealing with right now. May these problems strengthen and unite our people. Lord God, help us to have peace and success in all the things that we do. All these we ask in your holy and mighty name. Amen.
With the permission of the chamber, we declare a 1-minute suspension. Sino pa sa building? Session is resumed. The secretary will please call the roll.
Roll call of members. The Honorable Senators Angara, Aquino, Binay, Cayetano Alan Peter, Compañero S, Cayetano Pia S, Defensor Santiago, Ejercito, Enrile, Escudero, Estrada, Gingona, Hunasan, Lapid, Legarda, Marcos, Usmeña, Pimentel, Po, Recto, Revilla, Soto, Trillanes, Villar, Senate President Drilon.
13 senators are present. The chair declares the presence of a quorum. The Majority Leader, Acting Majority Leader.
Mr. President, with the consent of the Senate, I move that we dispense with the reading of the Journal of the 69th Session, May 5, 2015, and consider the same as approved.
Any objection? Hearing none. The reading of the Journal of Session number 69, Tuesday, May 5, 2015 is dispensed with, and the same is hereby approved.
Mr. President, I would like to acknowledge our guests in the gallery. They are delegates from the Secretariat General of the Senate of the Kingdom of Cambodia here on a study visit. Mr. Kim Sochetra is the head of delegation. Ton Kuntu, Mr. Sok Sochet, Mr. Koy Malay Viryak, Ms. King Soswafi. We welcome them to the Senate, Mr. President.
The presence of the delegation from the Secretary General of the Senate of the Kingdom of Cambodia is hereby acknowledged for the record. Let the record reflect the presence of Mr. Kim, Mr. Toon, Mr. Sok, Mr. Koy, Ms. King. Welcome to the Philippine Senate.
Mr. President, I move that we proceed with the reference of business.
Secretary will read the reference of business.
Bills on first reading. Senate number 2729 entitled an act amending Section 150 of RA 8424, otherwise known as the National Internal Revenue Code as amended by Senator Paolo Benigno Bamaquino IV.
Ways and Means.
Senate number 2730, an act expanding the benefits and privileges of persons with disabilities, amending sections 32 and 33 of RA 7277 as amended, otherwise known as the Magna Carta for Persons with Disabilities, and for other purposes by Benigno Bamaquino IV.
Ways and Means, Social Justice, Welfare, and Rural Development.
Senate Number 2731, an act providing for the benefits and privileges to pregnant women and their families, appropriating funds therefore and for other purposes, Senator Defensor Santiago.
Women and Family Relations, Gender Equality, Labor, Employment, Human Resource Development, Finance.
Senate Number 2732, an act establishing public beach access sites to and along shorelines, Senator Defensor Santiago.
Environment and Natural Resources,
Senate Number 2733, an act penalizing the lack of lifeguards, trained first aid personnel, and first aid equipment in all coastal and beach resorts and resorts with pools, Senator Defensor Santiago.
Health and Demography, Environment and Natural Resources,
2734, an act providing professional development for elementary school principals in early childhood education and development, Senator Defensor Santiago.
Education, Arts and Culture,
Senate Number 2753, an act penalizing the neglect of a child by parents or persons legally responsible for such child's care, Senator Defensor Santiago.
Justice and Human Rights, Women, Family Relations, and Gender Equality,
Senate Number 2763, an act amending Article Numbers 14 and 15 of Executive Order Number 209, also known as the Family Code of the Philippines, Senator Defensor Santiago.
Women, Family Relations, Gender Equality,
Senate Number 2737, an act abolishing the National Coordinating and Monitoring Board and creating the National Commission for Senior Citizens, amending therefore RA 7432 as amended by RA 9257 as further amended by RA number 9994 by Senator Paolo Benigno Bamakino IV.
Social Justice, Welfare, Rural Development, Civil Service, Government Organization.
Senate Number 2738, an act establishing the Filipino Identification System by Senator Drilon.
Justice and Human Rights, Finance.
Resolutions PSR Number 1289, directing the proper Senate Committee to conduct an inquiry of legislation to report that 16 major Philippine cities are not ready for climate change, Senator Defensor Santiago.
Climate Change, Local Government.
PSR Number 1290, the resolution directing the proper Senate Committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the report that the Philippines dropped in a global ranking of 133 countries based on social progress, Senator Defensor Santiago.
Social Justice, Welfare, Rural Development.
PSR Number 1291, directing the proper Senate Committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the report that human intrusion on animal habitats may lead to an increase in infectious diseases, Senator Defensor Santiago.
Health and Demography.
PSR Number 1292, directing the proper Senate Committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the report that the National Bureau of Investigation discovered a new date rape drug being used in the country by Senator Defensor Santiago.
Public Order and Dangerous Drugs.
PSR Number 1293, directing the proper Senate Committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the 2013 Commission on Audit report flagging 3.2 billion pesos in cash advances unliquidated by the Commission election, Senator Defensor Santiago.
Electoral Reforms, People's Participation.
PSR Number 1294, directing the Committee on Climate Change to look into the efforts of the Climate Change Commission and all other involved agencies in preparing the country's intended nationally determined contribution as part of its commitment for the COP21 negotiations in Paris this December 2015, Senator Ligarda.
Climate Change.
PSR Number 1295, directing the proper Senate Committee to conduct an inquiry of legislation on elected officials' alarming practice of barricading office buildings to prevent the service of their suspension or removal order, Senator Defensor Santiago.
Justice and Human Rights.
PSR Number
And
1296.
Local Governments.
PSR Number 1296, directing the proper Senate Committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the mounting political pressures that reportedly prompted the resignation of former Customs Commissioner John Sevilla, Senator Defensor Santiago.
Ways and Means.
PSR Number 1297, directing the proper Senate Committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the report that armed conflict cost 26.7 million pesos in agricultural damage in Maguindanao, aggravating the impact of drought in the area, Senator Defensor Santiago.
Agriculture and Food.
PSR Number 1298, directing the proper Senate Committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the reported increase in the foreign workers in the Philippines, Senator Defensor Santiago.
Justice and Human Rights, Labor, Employment, Human Resource Development.
PSR number 1299, directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the report that more than 100 positions in the professional regulatory boards are still vacant. Senator Defensor Santiago.
Civil Service, Government Reorganization.
PSR number 1300, directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the report that cybercrime incidents in the Philippines more than doubled in 2014 by Senator Defensor Santiago.
Youth Justice and Human Rights.
PSR number 1301, expressing the deepest sympathy and condolences of the Senate of the Philippines to the Republic of Nepal for the tragic loss of more than 2,500 lives and widespread destruction brought about by a 7.8 magnitude earthquake off Kathmandu on 25 April 2015, Senator Lapid.
Rules.
Communication letter from the Office of the President of the Philippines transmitting to the Senate two original copies of RA number 10660 entitled An Act Strengthening Further the Functional and Structural Organization of the Sandigan Bayan, further amending Presidential Decree number 1606 as amended, and appropriating funds therefore, which was signed by His Excellency President Benigno S. Aquino III.
To the archives.
Additional reference of business. Bills on first reading. Senate number 2739, entitled An Act Expanding the Use of the Legal Assistance Fund, amending for the purpose Section 26 of RA number 8042, otherwise known as the Migrant Workers and Overseas Filipinos Act of 1995 as amended. Senator Defensor Santiago.
Labor, Employment, Human Resource Development, Foreign Affairs, Finance.
Senate number 2740, An Act Protecting the Right to Social Media Privacy in Educational Institutions. Senator Defensor Santiago.
Justice and Human Rights, Education, Arts, and Culture.
Senate number 2741, An Act Providing for Interpreters in all judicial, quasi-judicial, investigative proceedings, and public hearings involving deaf individuals. Senator Defensor Santiago.
Justice and Human Rights, Social Justice, Welfare, and Rural Development.
Senate number 2742, An Act Facilitating and Regulating International Disaster Relief and Initial Recovery Assistance and for other purposes by Senator Ligarda.
National Defense and Security, Foreign Relations, Ways and Means, Finance.
Senate number 2743, An Act Renewing the Franchise Granted to Satellite Paging Systems Philippines Inc., presently known as now Telecom Company Inc., under RA 7301 as amended by RA 7940, entitled An Act Granting Satellite Paging Systems Philippines Inc. a franchise to construct, establish, operate, and maintain radio paging systems and trunk radio systems within the Philippines for a period of 25 years and for other purposes for another 25 years from the effectivity of this act by Senator Ligarda.
Committee on Rules.
Senate number 2744, An Act Converting the Tarlac College of Agriculture, TCA, in the municipality of Camiling, province of Tarlac, into a state university to be known as the Tarlac Agricultural University, and appropriating funds therefore by Senator Paolo Benigno Aquino IV.
Rules.
Senate number 2745, An Act Recognizing and Strengthening Alternative Care of Children, providing incentives to agencies providing the same by Senator Escudero.
Women, Family Relations, Gender Equality, Social Justice, Welfare, Rural Development, Ways and Means.
Senate number 2746, An Act Providing for Enhanced Social Protection for the Working Poor and providing funds therefore. Senator Paolo Benigno Aquino IV.
Social Justice, Welfare, Rural Development, Government Corporations, and Public Enterprises, Finance.
Senate number 2747, An Act Creating Barangay Community Peace and Order Council for the utilization of barangay officials and its constituents in crime prevention and for other purposes by Senator Joseph Victorio Ejercito.
Committee on Local Government and Public Order, Dangerous Drugs.
Senate number 2748, An Act to Promote the Protection, Conservation, and Rehabilitation of Watersheds, supporting the national irrigation systems to guarantee continuing supply of water for agricultural production and to increase the productivity of farmers to sustain food self-sufficiency and providing the funding thereof. Senator Joseph Victor Ejercito.
Public Works, Environment, and Natural Resources, Ways and Means, Finance.
Senate number 2749, An Act amending Section 109A and F of the National Internal Revenue Code as amended by RA number 9337 and for other purposes by Senate 3rd.
Ways and Means, Agriculture and Food.
Senate number 2750, An Act to enforce greater accountability in Public Financial Management, PFM, by strengthening Congress's power of the purse, instituting an integrated PFM system, and increasing budget transparency and participation, and further purpose by Senator Drilon.
Finance.
Resolutions. PS Resolution number 1302. Resolution directing the Senate Committee on Health and Demography and other appropriate Senate committees to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation in the condition of maternal health care in the country and the status of the Philippines in meeting the objectives of the Millennium Development Goals that aim to improve maternal health. Senator Lapid.
Health and Demography, Women and Family Relations, Gender Equality.
PSR number 1303, directing the Senate Committee on Agriculture and Food and other appropriate Senate committees to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the reported prevalence of hepatitis E virus, HEV, among backyard-grown pigs. Senator Lapid.
Agriculture and Food.
PSR number 1304, directing the Senate Committee on Public Services and other appropriate Senate committees to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the reported shortage of plastic materials used for the production of driver's license cards issued by Land Transportation Office. By Senator Lapid.
Public Services.
PSR 1305, congratulating and commending Filipino figure skater Michael Christian Martinez for winning his second consecutive gold for the men's senior division at the 24th Triglav Trophy in Jesenice, Slovenia on 19 April 2005. Senator Lapid.
Senate Committee on Rules.
PSR number 1307, commending the People's Champ, Congressman Emmanuel Manny Pacquiao, for his exceptional performance during the fight of the century against Floyd Mayweather Jr. on May 2, 2015 at the MGM Grand Arena in Las Vegas, Nevada, and for contributing to the Filipino pride. By Senator Joseph Victor Ejercito.
Committee on Rules.
Letters from the BSP, Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, transmitting to the Senate copies of the following certified and authenticated BSP issuances in compliance with RA number 7653, the New Central Bank Act, Memorandum numbers 2015-18, 19, and 20, Circular Letter numbers 2015-19, 20, 21, 22, and 23, and Circular numbers 874 and 875 dated 8 and 15 April 2015.
Banks, financial institutions, and currencies.
Committee report number 128, prepared and submitted by the Committee on Finance on Senate number 2751 with Senators Defensor Santiago, Joseph Victor Ejercito Estrada, Lingona III, and Escudero as authors thereof, entitled The Budget Impoundment Control Act, recommending its approval in substitution of Senate numbers 404, 661, 779, and 1834, sponsor Senator Escudero.
Ordinary business. Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I'd like to first acknowledge board members and advisors of the Microfinance Council of the Philippines and also the Nanay's clients of Kasaganaka.
Our visitors are so acknowledged for the record.
And we also have with us Congressman Willie Caminero of the 2nd District of Cebu. We welcome him to the Senate and all of them.
Congressman Willie Caminero is from the 2nd District of Cebu. Make the presence of our colleague from the House of Representatives of record for today's session. Welcome to the Senate.
Mr. President, I now move that we transfer House Bill number 4427 under Committee Report number 127 from the calendar for ordinary business to the calendar for special orders.
Any objection so transferred?
With the consent of the Senate, I move that we consider House Bill number 4427 under Committee Report number 127.
In order.
With the permission of the body, I move that the Secretary read only the title of the measure.
Secretary will read the title of the measure.
House Bill number 4427, an act creating an additional legislative district in the province of Cebu to be known as the 7th Legislative District.
Majority Leader.
I move now, Mr. President, that we recognize Senator Marcos to sponsor the measure.
Senator Marcos is recognized to sponsor the measure.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, I have the honor to report to the Senate Committee Report number 1, House Bill number 4427, which seeks to create an additional legislative district in the province of Cebu to be known as the 7th Legislative District. The province of Cebu is one of the most developed provinces in the Philippines, while the highly urbanized city of Cebu, which is the main center of commerce, trade, education, and industry in the Visayas, is not under provincial supervision. It is often grouped with the province together with two other highly urbanized cities of Lapu-Lapu and Mandaue for geographical and statistical purposes. With many beautiful islands, white sand beaches, luxury hotels and resorts, diving locations and heritage sites, high domestic and foreign tourist arrivals have fueled the tourism industry of Cebu. It consistently gets a big share of tourist arrivals in the Philippines and has become a tourist getaway to central and southern Philippines. The province also hosts various national and international conferences every year. The province of Cebu is ranked number 5 in the population of the number 5 most populated province of the country, with a population of 2,619,362 based on the 2010 census of population and housing issued by the Philippine Statistics Authority. At present, the province has 6 legislative districts. House Bill number 4227 seeks to create 1 additional legislative district out of municipalities from the existing 2nd Congressional District to be known as the 7th Legislative District. Under the present measure, the proposed 7th Legislative District shall be composed of the municipalities of Dumanhog, Ronda, Alcantara, Mualboal, Badian, Alegria, Malabuyok, and Ginatilan. The proposed new district has a population of 200,092 based on the 2010 census of the Philippine Statistics Authority. The municipalities of Argao, Dalaguete, Alcoy, Boljun, Oslub, Santander, and Sambuan shall continue to comprise the 2nd Legislative District of the province. These municipalities have combined population count of 223,360 based on the 2010 census conducted by the Philippine Statistics Authority. The proponents had explained that the present 2nd Legislative District is located in the southern tail end of the elongated island of Cebu. Its land area is almost 1/3 of that of the entire province. It is composed of 15 municipalities, which is more than 1/3 of the 44 municipalities of the province. It has the biggest number of barangays at 284 and has 246.8 kilometers of national roads, the longest among the 6 legislative districts of the province. The enormous size of the land area of the present 2nd Congressional District, as compared to the remaining congressional districts of the province of Cebu, burdens its present representatives in the effective discharge of its duties and of their duties to their constituents. My dear colleagues, it was argued that the creation of a new legislative district will boost the development efforts not only in the said area, but in the whole province. It is also noted that the Sangguniang Panlalawigan of the province of Cebu passed a resolution asking the 6 district representatives of the province to work for the passage of a law increasing the number of legislative districts for the province. The 1987 Constitution, under Article 6, Section 5, Subparagraph 1, mandates that the House of Representatives shall be composed of not more than 250 members unless otherwise fixed by law, who shall be elected from legislative districts apportioned amongst the provinces, cities, and the metropolitan Manila area in accordance with the number of their respective inhabitants, and on the basis of a uniform and progressive ratio, and those who, as provided by law, shall be elected through a party list system of registered national, regional, and sectoral parties or organizations. Furthermore, Article 6, Section 5, Subparagraphs 3 and 4 of the 1987 Constitution provides, amongst others, that, Subparagraph 3, each legislative district shall comprise, as far as practicable, contiguous, compact, and adjacent territory. Subparagraph 4 within 3 years following the return of every census, the Congress shall make a reapportionment of legislative districts based on the standards provided in this section. With the increasing population of the province of Cebu, and for the reasons just mentioned, the said province indeed deserves an additional seat in the House of Representatives. May I therefore request my colleagues in this august chamber to join me in approving House Bill 4427 under Committee Report 127. Thank you.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, to give our colleagues the opportunity to review the measure, I move that we suspend consideration of House Bill number 4427 under Committee Report number 127.
So suspended.
Mr. President, a minute suspension, please. Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, with the consent of the Senate, I move that we resume consideration of Senate Bill number 2581 under Committee Report number 95. This is the Continuing Professional Development Bill, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none. Consideration of the measure on second reading is in order.
Mr. President, the parliamentary status of the measure is that we closed the period of committee amendments last February 25. I thus move that we open the period of individual amendments.
Period for individual amendments is in order.
I move that we recognize the sponsor, Senator Trillanes.
Senator Trillanes is recognized.
With the consent of the sponsor, I move to recognize Senator Soto for the proposed individual amendment.
Senator Soto is recognized for the amendments on Senate Bill 2581.
Thank you, Mr. President. Will the distinguished gentleman from Bicol yield to some questions for clarification?
Most definitely, Mr. President. We welcome the insights always of the Minority Floor Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 2581. This is a Continuing Professional Development Act of 2015 as entitled in our proposed measure. May we know the background of the bill? How did this come about, knowing that there are professional development programs currently? May pattern po ba ito? Is there a treaty that we are complying with? Or what is the pattern that we use to come up with this measure, Mr. President?
Well, Mr. President, it was the PRC and the PRBs who helped in crafting the CPD bill. And this is intended to prepare and protect our Filipino professionals for the ASEAN Economic Community 2015. So with the establishment of the AEC, free flow of services, including professional services across the ASEAN member states, will now be instituted. Along with this, ASEAN mutual recognition arrangements are being carried out in the following professions regulated by the PRC, such as engineering, nursing, medicine, dentistry, architecture, accountancy, and surveying. The MRAs for the other professions are targeted to be developed and completed under the AEC 2015 blueprint. One of the major components of the ASEAN MRA is the CPD. Attendance to CPD and earning CPD units are the major requirements for the accreditation of Filipino professionals as ASEAN professionals. This is true for the professionals in the other AMS, ASEAN member states. It is for this reason that the PRC program on CPD must be strengthened, institutionalized, and aligned internationally, which is, in fact, the main intent of the CPD bill. The CPD bill will also prepare our local professionals in so far as our commitments to other international agreements are concerned. An example of this is the WTO, which likewise espouses for the progressive liberalization of trade in services. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President, well, we thank the gentleman somehow, no, but I think he's able to answer some of my forthcoming questions with that. But let me go into the details if possible. No, when you say PRC, you refer to the Professional Regulatory
Commission.
Commission.
Yes.
Okay, and then when you say the PRB, you refer to the Professional Regulatory Board. All right,
yes.
Thank you. Now, there are also certain professional organizations already conducting mandatory continuing professional development programs. No? And the way I understand it is you also mentioned that there already exists various professional regulatory laws. And then, may you please will you please again reiterate why we need a separate legislation to implement the continuing professional programs, development programs by the PRC? That's the way I understand it, Mr. President, if you don't mind.
Well, Mr. President, out of the 44 professional regulatory laws, only 26 contain provisions on CPD. However, there are two different modes by which the CPD is being implemented. First, 16 of the PRLs treat CPD as a voluntary requirement in the renewal of the professional license, and as such, it mandates only the concerned PRBs to prescribe CPD guidelines, such as in the case of accountancy, chemical engineering, and guidance and counseling.
Presently, it's voluntary.
16 of the PRLs.
16 of them.
Then 4 of the PRLs require CPD as mandatory requirement in the renewal of professional license, namely geology, interior design, environmental planning, and real estate services. There are also ongoing incentives to include CPD as a compulsory requirement for the practice of the following professions: chemistry, pharmacy, agricultural engineering, metallurgical engineering, and forestry. 17 professions do not have CPD provisions in their PRLs, such as medicine, civil engineering, optometry, etc. So, right now, instead of us waiting to amend all of these 44 PRLs, or at least majority of these PRLs, we believe that this would be the most expedient way to fulfill that requirement, Mr. President.
All right. Well, for the record, Mr. President, at the outset, let me place it on record. I am in support of this measure. No? But let me ask this question. Can we not, instead of creating the Continuing Professional Development Council, can we not utilize the different accredited professional organizations to conduct the Continuing Professional Development Program?
Well, Mr. President, we will always welcome any proposal from the minority leader. Anyway, this is just the committee report. This is the working draft, so to speak, and we welcome any insights and inputs and amendments later on from the minority leader.
Well, I really do not have a specific amendment in mind, no, but I just want it justified.
Okay.
That the other or the accredited professional organizations need the Continuing Professional Development Council. We just want to make sure that it is indeed necessary.
Okay. Well, Mr. President, the CPD Council and the APO or IPO or Accredited Professional Organization or Accredited Integrated Professional Organization have separate and distinct functions when it comes to the CPD. The CPD councils are mandated to evaluate and assess qualifications of the applicants for accreditation as CPD providers and their programs, and to monitor the implementation of these CPD programs to ensure that the target program outcomes are achieved. While whereas the APOs or IPOs, on the other hand, may be accredited as CPD providers. With the creation of the CPD Council, the CPD implementation will be under the administrative control and supervision of the government through the PRC. It may be noted that the APOs or IPOs are private organizations, Mr. President.
All right, thank you. So will the Continuing Professional Development Program be mandatory to all professionals, Mr. President?
Yes, Mr. President.
Okay. What if there are valid and unavoidable circumstances that hinder a professional from undergoing the program? Hindi kaya dapat graduated penalties lang for not complying with the program and not deprive them, because I understand in your bill we will be depriving them of their professional PICs, the identification cards. Outright ba ito or is this outright?
Well, Mr. President, the bill provides for the power of the CPD Council to issue operational guidelines subject to the approval of PRC and PRB concerned. Graduated penalties for not complying with CPD programs may thus be prescribed by the CPD Council in the operational guidelines.
So graduated penalties na proposal dyan sa measure right now?
Yes, Mr. President. And we can insert even a phrase there to make sure that the licenses at no point would the licenses be revoked for failure to fulfill their CPD requirements, Mr. President.
I'm not sure if I recall it right, but is there an exemption for professionals from undergoing the Continuing Professional Development?
Wala.
Like, for example, 20 years in the profession or professor in a related field. Hindi pa rin exempted, mandatory pa rin.
Well, the idea, Mr. President, is to make it mandatory for all professionals so that they would be updated to the current trends and knowledge and technology that's related to the field of practice, Mr. President.
Thank you. I agree with that. All right. So to the present professionals, what will be the benefits of the Development Program. Ito ba, madadagdagan ba kita nila rito? Madali ba makakahanap ng trabaho? Madadagdagan ba yung trabaho? Ano bang sa tingin ninyo magiging apekto po nito sa even the marketability of these professionals in the international employment or community? Meron po ba pakikinabangan sila dito?
Meron po, most definitely, Mr. President. Improving and upgrading the competence and competitiveness of the professionals will surely increase their chances of employment. And Section 12 of the bill provides for the formulation and implementation of the career progression and specialization program for every profession which actually form part of the CPD. In other words, as a position of a professional goes higher, or as the professional acquires specialization in the course of his career, his salary or compensation will also naturally increase. To sum up, compliance with the CPD leads to a career progression and specialization, which eventually makes our professionals more competitive or qualified locally and overseas, Mr. President.
Are there other countries that have this, Mr. President, right now?
Well, Mr. President, at the very least, the ASEAN member states have a similar
right.
requirement and qualification.
So this would be in line with the so-called ASEAN qualifications reference framework.
Yes, Mr. President.
Pati na yung ASEAN Mutual Recognition Arrangement. Is that right, Mr. President?
Yes, Mr. President.
Sa atin, ano ba ang tawag nun sa atin? Yung ano?
Which one, Mr. President?
We have a qualifications framework, ano? Philippine qualifications framework. Is that right?
Yes, Mr. President,
Right.
the PQF.
Okay. So you believe that this will greatly enhance our professionals in the international community or international competition?
Yes, Mr. President. And it will also equip our professionals with the necessary requirements should they opt to work abroad. The employers here and abroad would be looking definitely for this requirement, or at least other CPD or continuing professional educational requirements, Mr. President.
All right. One final matter, Mr. President. The program that we are proposing now. Have you come up with a cost and benefit analysis to our professionals? Magagastos ba sila rito? How much will it cost to them?
Well, taking CPD programs necessarily entails some cost and expense on the part of the professionals. The cost of CPD programs, as well as the needed time to be allocated for the said purpose, will depend on the nature of the CPD program to be provided. In return, though, the professionals earn to a certain degree such competence and skill which they can apply in their respective practice. This in turn will benefit the public, who are direct recipients of services rendered by these professionals. On a larger scale, the CPD is considered to be a potent tool in producing competent and responsible core of Filipino professionals who are instrumental in achieving inclusive growth for the nation. But personally, or as individual professionals, Mr. President, they can look at this as a personal investment for knowledge in their chosen profession.
I'm sorry, Mr. President. Just one final matter. Let me correct myself. Just for clarification also, because I think this might be a subject of an amendment. No? Section 13, your Section 13 says the role of concerned government agencies and the private sector. All concerned government agencies and private firms and organizations employing professionals shall include the CPD as part of their human resource development plan and program, and allocate the necessary funding requirement for the attendance of their professionals in CPD programs. We are mandatorily asking the agencies and private firms and organizations employing professionals to allocate funds sa attendance nila sa CBD programs. Tama ba po ito?
Well, Mr. President, that is what was proposed by the PRC. But again, we welcome any proposed amendments coming from the minority leader later on, should he feel the need to rephrase it or delete it altogether, Mr. President.
Kasi naisip ko, Mr. President, we should give the government office and private firms the freedom to propose the funding, whether shared or borne by the employers. Baka pwedeng ganun. So, pwede nating,
I
pwede
would
tayong silent doon,
I would agree to that, Mr. President.
All right. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you. That is all, Mr. President. I wish to thank the gentleman for responding to my questions. Thank you.
But thank you also, Mr. President, to the minority leader.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, with the indulgence of the sponsor, I would also like to avail of the period of committee amendments to ask some clarificatory questions and help me prepare some amendments.
If the sponsor will yield.
Yes, most definitely, Mr. President.
Thank you. I was listening intently to the exchange between the minority floor leader and the sponsor, and it caught my attention, and I'd like to make some follow-up questions. The minority floor leader, I believe, asked about the practice in other professions with regards to, well, the minority floor leader initiated his query, I believe, with a question on the need for this bill, and then followed up with a question on how many of the existing professions have actually any continuing professional education program in place. And the sponsor gave a listing. No, I didn't jot down the numbers, but I believe the response was there are a number that require continuing professional education. Is that by their law? Can you just repeat that so I can take off from there?
Well, Mr. President, out of the 44 professional regulatory laws, 18 do not have CPD provisions.
Okay.
16 have CPD provisions that are voluntary, and only 10 have mandatory CPD provisions.
Okay.
So we are in the process actually of updating the other PRLs, but we may not have time to
Amend all.
34 bills, Mr. President.
So this is, in a sense, an initiative or a product of, this is a bill that the PRC is supporting and lobbying for to help them initiate these programs or standardize these programs among all the 44 regulated professions. Is that correct?
Yes, yes, Mr. President.
Okay, because I do understand and would like to support any effort to simplify that objective. So if it is simpler to do this than to amend, 16 plus 10 other laws, I do understand and appreciate that this would be simpler. My only concern would be the possible different applications for the individual profession. Offhand, I don't know yet, but I can imagine that there may be different types of continuing education, and I'm not sure if one bill can cover all of those situations. But so what I would want to do is to ensure that this bill, when it becomes a law, sufficiently provides PRC with that mandate and power to work with the individual professional organizations to come up with their continuing professional educations. In other words, it's a thin line between PRC going overboard, but also ensuring that they have enough power. I've worked with enough professional groups to know that they can be difficult to work with. So we want to ensure that PRC has that power, but at the same time, that flexibility to adapt to the different needs of each profession. That's my concern, Mr. President. So I would like to go over this a little bit more to provide language that would try to encapsulate that concern of mine.
Well, yes, Mr. President. Just to enlighten the lady senator, on Section 8 of this proposed measure, defined the powers, functions, and responsibilities of the CPD Council. The CPD Council for each profession shall ensure the adequate and appropriate provision of CPD programs for their respective profession. Aside from this, we have also, in all the professional regulatory laws that we have passed, the past 2 Congresses, and we have passed 10 already, we are inserting a fixed provision for continuing professional development. So this will just be a bill that will have the same effect as that provision that was included during the past or in the past 10 PRLs that we have deliberated, Mr. President.
Because my experience, Mr. President, would be limited to the profession I am affiliated with, which is the legal profession, and under in our practice, we are required to take what is called the MCLE, and this is a requirement to renew your membership in the IBP. Short of which you will be listed as a delinquent, and as such you cannot sign pleadings, which is a big thing for practicing lawyers, well, especially those in litigation. So I would want to know, one of the questions earlier propounded by the minority floor leader was also the repercussions and penalties. And inasmuch as I would not want to deprive anyone of the right to practice, particularly in fields that affect the lives and liberties of people, unfortunately, I believe that the police power of the state is strong enough to regulate the practice. So in the practice of a health profession, I'm asking my staff to check, but if His Honor would have, I would tend to be stricter probably than others that would not be affecting the lives of our citizens. So that is one of the incidents where I would think that there would be a difference in the application, the repercussions or the penalties, the repercussions or penalties of non-compliance with the continuing education programs. And again, I would want the language of our bill to reflect the same, because it may not have any teeth if there are no penalties.
Well, I agree with the lady senator that every profession should be treated differently, and we can include that in the bill or in the subsequent implementing rules and regulations of the said law.
I would like to know, Mr. President, if the resource persons of His Honor could enlighten us and put on record what are the requirements to renew your PRC card for those in the health profession. What I'm told is that if the health practitioners would attend talks, forums, or symposiums, they would earn points, and these are points that are needed to renew their card. So, do I understand correctly? Without those points, the card will not be renewed, and they will not be allowed to practice. Is that correct? And for what health professions does this apply? Is this just MDs or also other health professions?
Well, Mr. President, it depends upon the profession. I can actually give the lady senator, if she will give me enough time, I can provide that information per profession.
Okay. Well, the only reason why I would like to see it is so that we have a better understanding exactly of these repercussions. And, and before I make my own conclusions, may I know from the PRC whether it is their position that failure to comply with these continuing professional education programs would in fact result in the suspension of their rights to practice. Is that a general rule, or it only applies to some?
It's a primary requirement, Mr. President, for the renewal of the license.
So then short of which their license cannot be renewed and they cannot practice, correct?
Yes, Mr. President, but it's still there. They cannot practice,
yes,
but it is not revoked.
Correct.
So should they have the time later on to take up CPD courses, then they can
Yes.
again.
Well, I support that. I have no problem with that, especially, like I said, for the professions that affect the citizens' life, property, health. As long as the CPE programs are reasonable, and I believe that's also part of the powers, no, that the board reviews. I do not want to delay the
Before, can
Yes.
the chair intervene? Would this also cover teachers, so that a continuing education for teachers would be required?
Yes, Mr. President. And in fact, it is one of the PRS that has no CPD provisions.
Well, because I recall that some time ago, the requirement there was a requirement for, and I'm talking from memory. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I do recall vaguely that teachers were required to go through a continuing education program as a prerequisite for continuously exercising the profession. And there was an uproar and from the, I don't know how many, 500,000 teachers or something. And we had to scrap that requirement. Is this a correct recollection, Mr. Sponsor?
Probably I was too young then, Mr. President.
Can we ask our resource persons, because this is a recollection that I am having, and I may be wrong, but what I do recall was that there was a requirement of a continuing education training for teachers, and this caused an uproar because I don't know how many 100,000 teachers who passed the licensure examination for teachers complained that the requirement caused them so much difficulty.
Well, Mr. President, I was informed that that incident happened around 1999 or thereabouts. So, but the implementation of this law would depend again on the professions. But at least for the other professions that are covered, for example, by the ASEAN economic community, then at least they're already equipped. We have that facility to implement that.
Can the
So-
chair seek clarification? What exactly does that mean? Are teachers required to go through a continuing program of education after they pass the licensure exams?
Well, probably because, Mr. President, that's the reason, probably, that there are no CPD provisions.
I'm sorry?
That there are no CPD provisions in the PRL for teachers. That's probably the reason, Mr. President. And should that be a contentious issue, we can always qualify it in the CPD law, Mr. President.
May the chair, may the sponsor spread into the record which professions would have the continuing education program as a requirement for the renewal of licenses?
Well, at present, the mandatory CPD provision that's inserted in the PRL are geology, interior design, environmental planning, real estate service, chemistry, agricultural engineering, pharmacy, metallurgical engineering, forestry, and right now it's included in the advanced stage in the legislative process is the nutrition and dietetics. Mr. President.
So, all right. If this bill becomes law, how would this change the present situation? Would the CPD, or the commission, whatever this commission is called,
Yes.
be now authorized to add other professions in the scope of the continuing
Professional.
education program?
Yes, Mr. President. It will,
The answer is yes.
yes, it will now include all the 44. However, as what was mentioned earlier during the interpellation of the minority leader, it will be closely coordinated with the PRBs or professional regulatory boards. Now, should the CPD for teachers would be contentious or costly for teachers, then they can qualify and have their own CPD program that would be convenient, yet still would satisfy the requirements of the CPD law, Mr. President.
So in effect, it will now be dependent on the decision of this body whether or not teachers, for example, would be required to take this continuing exam. I mean, the annual review classes or something.
No, Mr. President. It will now be mandatory for all professions. However, that mandatory requirement can be designed to be convenient and less costly for our teachers, Mr. President.
In any case, these are questions that the chair would like to raise at this stage. Maybe at a future, when this matter is again put on the table, there can be a more extensive discussion on this. Yes, Madam Majority Leader.
Yes. Actually, Mr. President, I'd also like to put on record a response to the presiding officer's, the Senate President's question, but just information that may contribute to the discussion or the concern. Given that the DepEd is in the process of training the teachers for the shift to a K-12 program, they are actually all undergoing mandatory training for this K-12 program. So,
Yeah, the training, but what about in effect, a suspension of
Yes.
the license which they have gotten?
And again, I am not the sponsor. I do happen to be the chairman of the Committee on Education, so this is my personal view. I would actually support a very strong requirement to ensure that they undergo this training, because this shift to the K-12 program is not just an additional 2 years. We had the third of our series of hearings yesterday, and it was very clear that the 2 senior high school years, although we focus on that because it is a big thing, 2 additional years, it is really a change in the whole pedagogy and way of teaching. So these teachers are required to go through this,
Right.
both the public and private. In fact, on a separate matter, there is a need for a separate budget to really retrain even instructors in the state universities and colleges and those teaching in higher education institutions would have opportunities to teach in the senior high, but they would require separate training. So if this type of training, definitely to my mind, is part of continuing education, because you cannot continue in your profession without knowing the not just the latest, but now what is considered the best mode of teaching. So I to share this information with the body, because I would support such a measure with the DepEd. But on that note, if I may just wrap up my own questions.
Mr. President, if I may, and just
Yes, of course.
put in additional information in relation to the question or the concern of the Senate President. Again, the graduation of the penalties would be in accordance with the different professional regulatory boards. So, for some professions, should the PRBs allow heavier penalties leading to as high as suspension for those who fail to comply with the CPD requirements, then that would be the case. Now, for the other PRBs who believe that it would be too harsh to suspend it, then they can have other graduated forms of penalties short of suspension of the license. And now, for the ASEAN Economic Community Blueprint for 2015, the mutual recognition arrangements being carried out in the following professions regulated by the PRC mandate the inclusion of continuing professional developments. And these professions are 1. Engineering, nursing, medicine, dentistry, architecture, accountancy, and surveying. Now, we tried to prioritize these PRLs to be amended, but sadly, most of them are the most contentious. That's why it failed to move beyond the committee level. But all of them are in agreement in as far as the CPDs. So that's why we came up with this concept of coming up with this CPD law, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Sponsor.
So, Mr. Sponsor, if I may continue, earlier the minority floor leader had also asked a question as to whether this type of this bill on the required continuing education would result in better jobs or more opportunities, and the response of the sponsor was yes. I do believe and support that as well. But I also will take the opportunity to put it on record that this, along with, and I know that the sponsor is not in support of the K-12, but one of the examples His Honor gave was even job opportunities abroad. And I actually just came from Spain, where I had a very exciting experience, which included discussions on the condition of our migrant workers there. And one situation that was brought to my attention was one case that I hear over and over again, including in the Arab countries, where we have engineers who go there, and in Saudi Arabia, in fact, in the Middle East in general, they have already been working there, and they're now, some of the Middle Eastern countries are now reviewing the number of years that our engineers have studied based on standards that they are now setting. And so that is where this whole K-12 issue becomes relevant, because they are looking at the number of preparatory years prior to the university years that a student took in. Now, again, I just mentioned that because along with continuing education, that is another thing that we look at.
Mr. President,
Yes,
if I may just respond. Well, if that's the argument, then once these Arab countries would start imposing that requirement, then for the next 5 years, there won't be any engineers, Filipino engineers, to be employed in these Arab states. Well, I believe still that employment is subject to supply and demand. I believe the Filipino engineers excel in their profession, even if they only have 10 years in primary education. I've also spoken to different employers, and they're choosing Filipino skilled workers, skilled professionals, despite their 10-year primary education. And the simple reason is they're choosing Filipinos for their other traits and other work ethic that they give primacy over the length of their primary education, Mr. President. But then I will not engage the lady senator on the wisdom of the K-12, because it will be a never-ending debate, Mr. President.
Well, and I actually agree with His Honor that they are hard because of all the other traits that they have, despite that. Actually, let me correct my sentence. They are desirable, and in some cases they are hard, but in cases that I've heard of, they have already encountered problems. And I mentioned the Middle Eastern countries in connection with this same discussion that I had in Spain. So it was also happening there. But I agree with His Honor that it is a difference in views, and let's not belabor the point. I support this measure, Mr. President. I do believe His Honor, in fact, mentioned enumerated the professions, and when he mentioned engineers, it struck me that it is really of vital importance that we support this measure, because there are professions that really affect. I was thinking more of the health and the lives in terms of the health of the people, but when you mentioned engineering, surveying, that goes into the structures of our infrastructure, and we know very well, given our being in an earthquake zone and all the natural calamities, this is something that we cannot sacrifice. I'd like to end on this note, that I believe that the message we should send to the professionals it's not a suspension of it's not denying them of their right to practice. It is the police power of the country, the state's police power to regulate that practice. So for that matter, I have been, and I'm sure many of us have been asked to speak in many annual assemblies of professionals, and we always see the senior members of that profession. No? Sometimes they're already in wheelchairs. Let's make it clear that we are not suspending or denying these noble men and women of their profession. What we're really saying is that, and the wording in the bill is actually very politically correct, that it is a condition to the renewal. So, many of them at the age of 80 will not really be renewing their PRC, but they are considered members of that profession. So if we look at it that way, it really is just finding the right balance between protecting the interests and the welfare and safety of our people and balancing it with the practice of the profession of these people. So I support this measure, but I do understand that there are committee amendments from Senator Binay, Senator Soto, and I may be proposing as well. So on that matter, on that note, Mr. President, I move to suspend the consideration of this measure.
So suspended.
A minute suspension, Mr. President.
Suspended for 1 minute.
Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
I move that we transfer Senate Bill number 2752 under Committee Report number 130 from the calendar for ordinary business to the calendar for special orders.
Can we have a 1 minute suspension before we act on the motion of the Majority Leader? Session is resumed.
Mr. President, I move that we proceed with the additional reference of business.
Yes, the Secretary is directed to read the additional reference of business because the proposed committee report is not yet in an order of business. So the Secretary will do so.
Second, additional reference of business. Committee reports. Committee report number 129 submitted by the Committee on Finance on PS Resolution number 287 introduced by Senator Joseph Victoria Hercito, entitled Resolution directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the 2011 disbursement acceleration program of the current administration implemented from the year 2011 up to year 2013 with the end view of formulating laws, policies, and regulations with regard to the use of savings and proper budget augmentation of the government, recommending that this be archived.
To the archive.
Committee report number 130, prepared and submitted jointly by the Committees on Trade, Commerce, and Entrepreneurship, Economic Affairs, Banks, Financial Institutions, Currencies, and Ways and Means on Senate number 2752, with Senators Legarda, Sencha A. Villar, Ejercito Estrada, and Paula Benigno Bamaquino IV as authors thereof, entitled An Act Strengthening Non-Government Organizations Engaged in Microfinance Activities for the Poor, recommending its approval in substitution of Senate numbers 106, 307, 1030, 1484, and 1830, sponsor Senator Paula Benigno Aquino Bamaquino IV.
To the calendar for ordinary business. Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I move that we transfer Senate Bill number 2752 under Committee Report number 130 from the calendar for ordinary business to the calendar for special orders.
So transferred.
With the consent of the Senate, I move that we consider Senate Bill number 2752 under Committee Report number 130.
Consideration of the measure at second reading is in order.
With the permission of the body, I move that the Secretary read only the title of the measure.
Secretary will do so.
Senate Bill number 2752, an act strengthening non-government organizations engaged in microfinance activities for the poor.
I move that we recognize Senator Aquino to sponsor the measure.
Senator Aquino is recognized.
Maraming salamat, Ginoong Pangulo. Good afternoon, Mr. President, my distinguished colleagues, mga kaibigan, mga kababayan. It is with great privilege that I address you today to support the development and inclusive growth of our poor and marginalized countrymen, as I sponsor Senate Bill number 2752 under Committee Report number 130, entitled An Act Strengthening Non-Government Organizations Engaged in Microfinance Activities, or otherwise known as Microfinance NGOs Act. The Philippine economy has grown immensely in the past years. We saw that in the last quarter of 2014, our economy grew at 6.9%, contributing to our annual gross domestic product growth rate at 6.1%. This figure is still one of the highest growth rates in our region. We are cited as the second fastest growing economy in Asia, second only to China, and we are the fastest growing economy in the ASEAN. And this is actually expected to be sustained over the next few years. Moreover, we have been earning improved investment grade ratings from Moody's, Fitch, and Standard & Poor. When a decade ago we were called the sick man of Asia, now we are among Asia's rising stars, if not Asia's rising star itself. Ngunit sa gitna po ng pag-unlad ng ating bansa, marami pa rin sa ating mga kababayan ang hindi nakakaranas nito at di nakakatikim ng ginhawang dulot po nito. In the latest report of the Philippine Statistics Authority, our poverty incidence for the first quarter of 2014 is at 25.8%. Ibig pong sabihin yan, Mr. President, meron pa po tayong 25 milyong mga kababayan na maituturing po natin na naghihirap. Habang tuloy-tuloy ang pag-angat ng Pilipinas, ang hamon po sa ating lahat ay siguraduhing nakikinabang ang lahat ng sektor ng ating bayan. And so, hand in hand with civil society and the private sector, we need to support and strengthen programs and efforts, private organizations and institutions that aid the poor in their journey towards prosperity. Apart from helping the poor directly through government programs, we also have the opportunity to bolster an entire sector willing to take part in advancing inclusive growth. The Microfinance NGOs Act aims to recognize the microfinance NGO sector and the crucial role that it plays in our struggle to alleviate our fellow Filipinos from poverty and enable the poor to build their own businesses and create their own sustainable livelihood. Mr. President, time and again, we have emphasized the important role of the micro, small, and medium enterprises, or MSMEs, in our nation's endeavor to foster inclusive growth. MSMEs compose 99.6% of total establishments in the Philippines, and they have contributed to 61.2% of the country's total employment. Now, out of this substantial piece of the pie, 91.6% are micro enterprises. These are enterprises which are composed of sari-sari stores, handicraft makers, service shops, and other modest businesses that serve as the main source of livelihood for millions of our countrymen. Micro-entrepreneurs also include local artisans, market vendors, and farmer entrepreneurs who transform local materials with products and services at greater value for their communities. Ang maliliit pong negosyong ito ay maaaring lumawak at maglaan ng mas mabuting kinabukasan para sa mga pamilyang Pilipino, basta't bigyan lang po natin sila ng ating tamang suporta. Mr. President, bilang dating social entrepreneur at ngayon po chairman ng Senate Committee on Trade, Commerce, and Entrepreneurship, marami na po tayong narinig na kwento ng ating mga kababayang nais magnegosyo. Sa ating patuloy na pakikinig at pakikipag-usap sa kanila, ang paulit-ulit na tanong po ay, Senator Bam, saan po kami makakahanap ng kapital para makapagpatayo ng maliit na tindahan o negosyo? Saan po kami pwedeng humiram na mababa lang ang interes para mapalago ang aming munting negosyo? Napakahalaga po na mabigyan natin ng suporta ang ating mga negosyante, lalo na sa kapital, para mapalago po nila ang kanilang mga negosyo at ang kanilang estado sa buhay. Mr. President, nais ko pong ibahagi sa inyo ang dalawang maikling kwento ng ating mga kababayan na dahil sa tulong ng Microfinance NGOs ay kanila pong nabuo ang kanilang kabuhayan na ngayon po ay lumalago at umaasenso. Lumaki po sa paghahabi ng banig ng pandan si Aling Esther Lumbo at ang kanyang asawa na si Mang Bartolome sa Negros Occidental. Sila po ang unang nagbenta ng mga hinabing pandan bags sa merkado. Ngunit nang kinailangan ng surgery ang kanilang ikatlong anak sa Manila, napilitan po silang iiwan ang kanilang negosyo upang tiyaking bumuti ang kalagayan ng kanilang anak. Nang pagbalik po nila sa kanilang bayan, naubos ang kanilang pangkabuhayan at nabaon po sila sa utang. Buti na lang po at tatagpuan po nila ang Negros Women for Tomorrow Foundation or NWTF na isang microfinance NGO na siyang tumulong sa kanila na makabalik sa kanilang pagdinegosyo. Ngayon po, sila ay nagbebenta na ng 150,000 pieces na gawa sa pandan kada buwan. Nakapagpatayo na rin po sila ng isa pang negosyo, isang bakery, at higit sa lahat, nasustentuhan po nila ang kanilang pamilya at nakapagtapos po ang kanilang 3 anak sa kolehiyo. Ang pangalawang kwento naman po ay tungkol sa pangangailangan ni Consuelo Valenzuela na kumita para sa kanyang pamilya. Siya po ay panlabing isa sa 15 magkakapatid, kung saan ang tatay po niya ay isang karpintero at naiwan sa bahay para mag-alaga ang kanyang nanay naman sa Baler, Aurora. Ninais ng pamilya nang makatapos po siya. Kaya bukod po sa trabaho niya sa munisipyo, nag-isip-isip po siya ng iba't ibang mga negosyo at produkto na pwedeng gawin. Nakahiram po siya ng 5,000 pesos mula sa Alalay sa Kaunlaran Incorporated or ASCII, isang microfinance NGO, nagturo sa kanya ng marketing at sales. Dinala po niya ang kanyang mga produkto sa mga provincial at regional trade fairs. Para kumita, binenta po niya ng wholesale ang kanyang mga produkto sa labas ng kanyang probinsya. At sa ganda naman po ng kanyang produkto at sa kabutihang palad, umabot na po ang kanyang mga produkto sa California, sa US. Napag-aral na po niya ang kanyang mga pamangkin at nasustentuhan po nila ang pangangailangan ng kanyang pamilya. There are many more Esthers and Consuelos in our country, Mr. President. Stories of grit, challenges, and struggles from poverty to determination and triumphs of growth through small-scale businesses and community projects. These would not have been possible without microfinancing and particularly microfinance NGOs. Kasama rin po natin ngayon ang mga ibang nanay at kliyente ng Kasaganaka Microfinance Group. Nandito rin po sila. If I can ask them to stand up, please. Pwede po kayong tumayo. Sila rin po, gaya po ni Esther at Consuelo, maraming salamat po, ay may mga kwento ng tagumpay sa tulong ng ating mga kapartner sa microfinance NGOs. Pangarap po ng maraming Pilipino ang magpatayo ng maliit na negosyo at maging lunas ito sa kanilang kahirapan. Ang tulong na handog ng mga microfinance NGO ang nagiging simula ng landas nila tungo sa kaunlaran. Mr. President, microfinance as defined by the BSP or Bangko Sentral is the provision of a broad range of financial services such as deposits, loans, payment services, money transfers, and insurance products to the poor and low-income households for their micro-enterprises and small businesses to enable them to raise their income levels and improve their living standards. Para po sa nakararami nating kababayang may maliit na negosyo, napakahalaga po ng tulong ng microfinance imbis na lumapit po sila sa mga nagfa 5-6. Sa sistemang 5-6, sa bawat 5 piso pong inutang mo, ang kailangan ibalik ay 6 na piso bawat araw. In other words, you pay an additional 1 peso per day for every 5 peso loan or additional 1,000 pesos per day for every 5,000 peso loan. Kung susumahin po natin yon, ang monthly rate ng 5-6 ay 600%. Ganun po kataas ang 5-6. And so, Mr. President, this is where the microfinance sector can fill in this gap and address the needs of our small businesses, specifically our micro-entrepreneurs. Mr. President, there's also a need to distinguish microfinance NGOs from other microfinance institutions. In the Philippines, microfinancing services are provided by cooperatives, rural and thrift banks, non-government organizations or NGOs, iba't ibang mga grupo po. And so it's important to note that the Microfinance NGOs Act only covers microfinance non-government organizations and does not cover for-profit microfinance institutions. Microfinance NGOs are non-stock, non-profit entities that share in the state's goal of inclusive growth and sustainable poverty alleviation. As not-for-profit institutions, the main purpose of a microfinance NGO is to empower the marginalized sector and give them the means to move themselves out of poverty and into financial sustainability. Microfinance NGOs offer a variety of loans to low-income households with an average nominal interest rate of 2 to 2.5% and a usual loan cycle of 6 months. Loans offered are not limited to business or livelihood loans. Types of loans can range from housing and educational to medical and even energy-related loans. In 2013, the 23 microfinance NGO members of the Microfinance Council of the Philippines alone had a gross loan portfolio of over 15.26 billion pesos, catering to more than 2.7 million micro-entrepreneurs. But, Mr. President, their services go beyond microfinancing. The earnings of these microfinance NGOs are either used for the sustainability of the organization to enhance the Pantawid Pamilyang Pilipino program. Many of these microfinance NGOs are already currently the partners of government. Another example, Mr. President, is the Department of Agrarian Reform. Ang kapartner naman po nila ay ang Center for Agriculture and Rural Development Inc. or CARD Incorporated at ginagawa po nila ang microfinance sa mga agrarian reform beneficiaries upang matulungan po ang ating mga kababayang magsasaka na makatayo sa sarili nilang mga paa. Ang TESDA naman po, Coca-Cola Philippines, and other local government units, kapartner rin po ang ASCII sa kanilang Sari-Sari Store Training and Access to Resources Program or STAR program. And here we find a partnership between a government agency, a large corporation, and our microfinance partners. Kitang-kita po natin na sa napakaraming partnerships po ng ating mga microfinance NGOs sa private sector, sa gobyerno, kitang-kita naman po na napakahalaga ng kanilang papel na ginagampanan sa ating lipunan. And of course, Mr. President, I have to also mention the Go Negosyo Law, which we passed last year. Since we passed this law and began building the negosyo centers around the country, we found that the public is most excited about the center's ability to connect and refer micro-entrepreneurs to legitimate financial institutions willing and able to cater to their needs. Microfinance NGOs also work hand-in-hand with the DTI to be able to provide these financing services at our negosyo centers. The Microfinance NGOs Act, Mr. President, will help our microfinance NGO sector become more effective sources of support for the poor, and it will encourage more institutions to help in the promotion of the development of micro businesses all over the country. Again, the majority of businesses in the Philippines. In the end, the goal of this measure is to ensure that more Filipinos will be able to write their own stories of success and development. Mr. President, esteemed colleagues, I urge all of you to join me in our continued push to empower our Filipino people with the skills and financial means to lift themselves out of poverty and achieve their own financial security. Let's support the microfinance NGOs that help make our dream of prosperity for all a true reality. Maraming salamat po at magandang hapon sa ating lahat. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Aquino.
Mr. President, to give our colleagues the opportunity to review the measure, I move that we suspend consideration of this measure.
So suspended.
Amid suspension. Mr. President, there being no other matter to tackle today, I move that we adjourn the session until 3 o'clock in the afternoon of Monday, May 11, 2015.
Session is adjourned until Monday, May 11 at 3 o'clock in the afternoon.